Hello and good evening, everyone. We're so excited to have you join us today on this Earth Day. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kimberly Roberts, and I'm one of the newest board members that has joined PJI. And I'm really excited to be here to introduce the kickoff conversation around race, justice, and the nature gap. And I think it's an appropriate topic for not only today, but for the broader intersection between race, justice, and the nature gap. I'm really excited to be a part of this work and to support the racial equity work that PJI is doing as an institution. And so I won't take much time, but I'm excited to pass it over to one of the co-executive directors, Megan Guevara, who is an outdoor enthusiast herself and really enjoys spending time outdoor with her husband, 3 sons, and her dog. So without further ado, I'm going to pop it over to Megan.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. I'm really excited to be the person that gets to host the first of this series of events. And I wanted to focus on an environmental justice topic tonight. That's something that has really been core to me as part of our equity journey, and also just really core to us being good human beings and thinking about what our survival is going to look like on the planet. So I'm glad that we're able to have a conversation about this topic. And there's a lot of different directions that we could have gone in tonight. We could have been talking about how climate justice disproportionately impacts communities of color. We could have been talking about how industrial development in red line neighborhoods has led to higher rates of asthma and cancer among certain communities. The list goes on, but we decided that for Earth Day, we wanted to focus on the great outdoors. And for me, as Kimberly mentioned, this is my happy place. This is where I go for rest and rejuvenation and for my mental and physical health. But I also know that that kind of access to the outdoors is a privilege, and it's a privilege that not everyone has. I live here in Colorado, and we're really proud of our conservation of natural spaces, but we don't spend much time talking about the fact that those natural spaces were stolen indigenous lands and that for the most part, they're set aside for the use of white people. And so I'm really excited tonight to be having a conversation with 2 outdoor adventure activist entrepreneurs who are trying to change that and trying to look at how can we get communities of color more connected to the outdoors. And before I introduce them, I want to also mention my colleagues who are in the chat box tonight. Your producer is Shavante Keaton. So if you have any technical questions, please feel free to chat her. And also just any questions in general about the session or for the panelists, Shavante is your person to talk to. And Wendy Shang is also hanging out in the chat box and is going to be sharing some resources with everyone. So we look forward to engaging all of you in the chat box. Please continue to say hi. We'd love to hear from you about how you connect to the outdoors and why this conversation is important to you tonight. But without further ado, I will welcome our 2 panelists for tonight. The first is Jessica Newton. Welcome, Jess. And Jess is the founder and CEO of Vibe Tribe Adventures, formerly known as Black Girls Hike, a global organization that encourages Black women, men, and youth to explore the great outdoors, practice conservation, and learn more about environmental science, health and wellness, and inspire each other to be who they are naturally. And Jess is also a Colorado transplant, and we hike some of the same trails. So I'm excited to be able to talk to you tonight about the work that you do and how you have fun. And our second panelist is Tyrhee Moore. And Tyrhee is a mountaineer and outdoor education advocate born and raised in Southeast Washington, D.C. His climbs include Grand Teton, Mount Kilimanjaro, Aconcagua, and the first all-African-American climb of Denali, featured in the award-winning documentary An American Ascent. In 2018, Tyrhee founded Soul Trak Outdoors, a nonprofit that helps to cultivate the next generation of outdoor leaders and environmental stewards. And after seeing American Ascent, I know that Tyrhee and I do not hike the same trails, but I'm very happy to have you here and to be able to have this conversation. So welcome to both of you. And I wanted to start out hearing more about why the outdoors is a passion for you. What got you started? What is your absolute favorite place in the outdoors? And what made this the focus of your work? And Tyrhee, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, I can get us started for sure. I would say that the outdoors is a passion for me because I guess specifically as a young kid when I was first sort of introduced to sort of just like natural space, being very athletic and like a very hyper kid, I always sort of looked for opportunities to really sort of exert that energy, but also really push myself. I think athletics and things like that came pretty naturally. But when you're sort of in the outdoors, there's always limitations to like what you can do. And like you get to a point where you're sort of like, in a position where you really start to self-reflect whether or not like, oh, like, am I comfortable doing this or am I afraid right now? Are my, like the people I'm with okay with this? And just like, it sort of really pushes all aspects of like your own personal comfort levels, but also like helps you develop as an individual. And so for me, that's sort of been something that has remained consistent. From the age of 12 up until now, where I'm 28, I've always sort of still sort of encountered those same sort of circumstances, even as an adult, where, you know, I continue to find new boundaries for myself and really continue to push those limitations that continue to come while I spend time there. And in terms of like my favorite places, I would say now, since I spend a lot more time in DC after sort of founding Soul Trak, and I really started to appreciate the local trails here. I have 2 dogs now, and so I take hikes frequently with them. And so I would say, honestly, like my favorite time outdoors are on those trails. Like here at Fort DuPont Park, I hike near my house pretty often, and it sort of serves as a space for just like stress relief, but as well as just like my own sort of time to sort of think through just like, you know, my daily processes and just like things that I'm going through. And so I really cherish and sort of value that time a lot more than when I did spend a lot more time outdoors and it was very casual and just like recreational. I think now I really appreciate the time to get outside a lot more, since, you know, it's like a much more intentional effort to do so. So I would say right now, at least, my favorite space is my local trail behind my house.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyree.
Mhm.
Jess, how about you?
So pretty much, I got into hiking and outdoor adventure as a child. My parents placed me in Montessori schools when I was younger, and a lot of the classroom education was actually outdoors. So we would do all of our science experiments along the creek. You know, you put your rain boots on, you go out, and then, you know, you get older, you go to middle school, you start hiking, and they start taking us ice climbing. And then high school, we were out at, you know, canoeing in the Colorado River, and we would take trips to Moab and then sleep in the canyon, on the edge of the canyon. And then as I got older, I just started hiking by myself with my daughter, and I just realized we were the only chocolate drops outside. So I was like, hey, there's nobody else out here that looks like me. And so I just had some intuition and started asking people if they wanted to come hiking with me, and that's how Vibe Tribe was birthed. So
And where's your favorite place to go?
my favorite place currently is a place called Castlewood Canyon. It's in Franktown, Colorado. Woo, Colorado. Um, and it's a place where I don't have to drive 2 hours to really feel engulfed in nature. And it's actually a canyon where you can walk down, because Colorado is kind of split in 2 places. So we have the plains, and then you drive a little more towards the mountain, and then it goes straight up. So I like the fact that I don't have to drive super far to really feel engulfed in all of the trees and the creek. And it's kid friendly, so my daughter can go, and I can easily take friends out who are new to nature. Yeah, Castlewood Canyon is one of my favorites right now.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's a beautiful spot, but my dog wasn't too crazy about Castlewood Canyon. It was a little bit too big for him when he was a puppy.
Oh no.
Oh, wonderful. And so you mentioned you and your daughter being the only Black girls that you saw out on the trail. And we called this session Race and Justice in the Nature Gap. Why does that gap exist? Why is there that stigma about people of color being out in nature? And what are the barriers when you do want to be outside to being able to enjoy natural spaces?
You want me to go?
Go for it, Jess. Yeah.
Okay. So I believe that there's twofold. So one is the stereotype that my community on the Black side, it's, girl, we don't do that, or we don't go hiking, we don't do mountain lions, we don't do bears. But then there's the other side where we weren't allowed to even make park reservations to go camping. And then also dealing with trees and nature and Black people, there's always been lynching. So there's a fear of that as well. So there's two folds to it. One side is our community, and the other side is people telling us this is not a space where you belong, which comes along with that white privilege that a lot of us are finally acknowledging that actually exist. So yeah, it's a real thing out here, and it's unfortunate to the point where we have kids in programs that I mentor, and they've never even been outside of Denver. And I'm like, what do you mean you've never? Yeah, I've never. My mom and I, we've never been outside of Denver, because that fear is so deeply rooted in going outdoors alone, not knowing how to get to the parks, not knowing the lack of education is very deeply rooted in the Black community as far as getting outdoors. So that's why Five Tribe's here to help train and educate and encourage and really be that supportive piece to get us outdoors.
Tyrhee, what do you think? Do you see similar things in your community?
Yeah, I would say that one thing that comes to mind is I think that sort of some like Black existence outdoors sometimes isn't validated to some degree. Like I think if you go to certain parts of the country, there are Black hunters, there are Black fishermen, there are people like farmers, there are people who do sort of exist in nature pretty frequently, but I think it just looks different than like very traditional or just like very publicized, like extreme outdoor adventure, climbing things like Denali. And so some of that is just like taking back that exists, like what that looks like for people, whether that's cooking out. I grew up near a park here in DC where people spent a lot of time in the parks, right? Like we just did it a lot differently. And so a lot of the work that we do at Soul Trak is just really sort of utilizing that space in a way that feels natural to us and doing it in a way that is organic and not forced or doesn't make sense, right? Like what our organization might be able to do here in DC, looks a lot different than like what people might be able to, how people may recreate in Montana, right? And just understanding like relativity plays a huge role in that. And just like utilizing a natural space around you in a way that like is realistic. But also it's expensive. It costs a lot of money to sort of be able to recreate in a way that some people would like, right? Like transportation is already really difficult if you're coming from an urban environment. A lot of people don't drive. And so getting to certain environments are hard. Equipment, like, you know, we try and sort of subsidize a lot of our programs for participants because of like how expensive it is to like take a group climbing, right? Or like how expensive it is to go camping and like having to sort of purchase, you know, $300-400 sleeping bags. And like, that's just one item that it takes to sort of do those things. And so, and even to the historical point that she made, right? Like I went to school in West Virginia. And when I told my family and my friends that I was going to school in West Virginia, it was so many sort of like advisories and like caution, like be careful, don't go anywhere that you don't like aren't familiar with. And like just a lot of just like rooted sort of trauma of just like what those like more like wooded and like deeper sort of more like, you know, rural environments sort of mean for us as a community. And so just you might take, like I took that very lightly when I was like, you know, 17, 18 years old. But as I've gotten older, you know, just understanding that sometimes is like a very sort of long, that like is culturally rooted for much further than, you know, what we might have sort of understood it as, until you try and get a group to go with you to Shenandoah, and they're all sort of asking these very, very like heavy questions, right? Like around like what that means for them beyond just like what I might have anticipated to just be a hike, right? And so I think that there's many different things, but I think sometimes just really trying to figure out how you can simplify sort of that existence. And like back to my point around just how we can do things that make sense for us and then slowly build upon that interest in a way that might sort of push people to try new things.
Can you say a little bit more about that? I know that with Soul Trak, a lot of your focus is on getting people out in their own neighborhoods and communities. And you mentioned that you're really enjoying exploring in your neighborhood and appreciating your local parks. What are those steps that you take to get people started, get their foot in the door, and create safe spaces where people are feeling more comfortable to get out?
Yeah, I would say that one, just understanding your community, right? Like, so it's to my benefit that I'm from DC. I've spent a lot of time here growing up. I have like sort of understand the culture of like how people enjoy time and try and meet people where they are. I think that that's really important in order to sort of really like me knowing that, you know, a lot of these things are going to push people to be uncomfortable, right? A lot of these things are going to require people to sort of be vulnerable, and to gain that trust from the community that I want to work with. It requires me to really take time to sort of tap into like their interests, get to know what they are willing and aren't willing to do, but also like bring things to them that they're genuinely interested in at its core first, and then try and expand from there. And so to my point, right, like we picnic outdoors, right? Like we take our kids outdoor. I don't have kids, but we have family programs that sort of invite people and their families into nature, and starting in a place that feels really comfortable for them. And then from there saying like, hey, you know, we use these parks for this, this, and this. Like we also want to implement something different, right? Like something new within this community that we've like grown to trust, like this grown, like that feels very familiar to us. And then sort of makes those things a lot more sort of transferable for folks that haven't really tried anything new in the past, you know, 15 years, right? And they're like, well, we're doing this together. We've done a couple of programs together. I'm thinking about going on this, you know, camping trip. But then also even things like cleaning up the parks, right? Like that is something that surprisingly may not be like a very just like sort of counterintuitive. Like people see like the city clean up a lot around here, like here, but understanding that sometimes some parks are under maintenance and like need a lot of help, need a lot of love, don't get a ton of funding or attention. And so we do push people to also look at these spaces as places that we take care of and that we have ownership over. Because I think that once you start to really sort of see something as yours or as the community's, you then also are willing to sort of really like sort of exist there in a way that you may not have before, right? Like saying, okay, like I'm gonna like maybe try and camp here, like, you know, because I've cleaned up here, I'm really familiar, I brought my kids here at this point. And so like why not try something new or like do something different? And so like to my point, I think that it's just been really important for us as an organization, and I guess as the leader of the organization, to really understand what is comfortable for people first, and then like what is a reasonable progression, or like what is not too much to ask of them, as we're sort of doing the work to really sort of put people in sort of this very new environment, or like these environments that are hard, or like really require folks to, you know, really look inwards and say like, okay, like I've lived a very comfortable life these past like couple years, or even for kids like who also have seen what is normal been for the past 12 years, and like are like, oh, like, you know, we have, you know, these Black leaders that are telling me like this is something I can do too, but understanding that, you know, we have to understand like that is them in that moment, right? Like they have to go back to their communities after a rock climbing program, and like are constantly being told maybe things like that's not for them, that's something for other people. But sort of like being able to sort of, when you meet them in those programs, sort of really build them up and sort of express that in a way to say like, hey, like, you know, we're doing this, we exist here. And I think that helps sort of continue to sort of cultivate a community like further up. And so that's, we do work with kids, college students, and like sort of an adult population to sort of really target this multi-tiered sort of level of engagement, because I've done a lot of youth work and just realized that it's really heavy for, you know, a 13-year-old to like go back and say like, oh, I love camping, or I love kayak. And what does that, like, how does the community sort of accept that, or their response to that? And so trying to, you know, show everyone they have space in nature.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, that it's not just about the individual people that you're working with, but what kind of community do they have around them that's going to support them as they're moving through these different steps. All right, thanks, Tyrhee. And Jess, I know with your group that you plan a lot of outings as well. And what have been some of the secrets to your success? What type of experience are you trying to create for participants?
Yeah, so one of the main things that Vibe Tribe has is that we actually have adventure guides throughout the US. We used to have it in Guam and then Canada as well. And so we really focus on the stewardship of that leadership portion, being able to train them, let them know that you are a big sister to those who are new outdoors, and you are that sister to the ones who have already been outdoors, who don't want to just explore on their own, because it's kind of dangerous exploring on your own in this day and age. But so yeah, that's one of the secrets to success, is really helping other people feel empowered. And so kind of just how I started out, just saying, hey, do you want to come hiking with me? It's women across the nation are doing the same thing. Like, hey, do you want to come hiking with me? And that really helps create that community that Tyrhee was saying, that community of outdoor adventures, the community of people who are already outdoors. Like, they feel like they have a supportive system. And I mean, it's in our blood. Nature is for everyone. And so I think that creating that supportive community is the secret to success. And then also just all the things that it helps with: mental health, nature therapy, stress reliever, a spiritual space for some people, and then just play. You should always play. Like, that's one thing that we forget as we grow older, is we forget as adults that we have to play. Like, it's important for our psychological piece to play. So that's the secret to my success, is leadership and training and support.
And do either of you have an example that you'd like to share of either a young person, a family, somebody that comes to mind where you've been able to see the impact of that progression from being unsure to being able to climb mountains or conquer new spaces?
Yeah, I have quite a few. I would say when I first began, I had girlfriends or people, and now they are my girlfriends, new people that would join us, and I would see them like every single hike or every single season, because we were just in spring, summer, and fall. But now we're year round. But before, it was so cool to see that same group of women, like, hey, what's up, Jess? What's up? And so I have one girlfriend, Jan. She says that she was bigger, but it's all in perspective. But she's lost so much weight, and she's an older woman, and she just has so much youthfulness in her, and she breathes so many new possibilities. And it's so good to see the consistency of having a supportive place for her to explore with her girlfriends, with her sisters. And now she's like, hey, I want to do something outdoors. What can I do to be a part of this outdoor, getting Black people outside exploring? She's gardening. She's, she goes to Montague Springs, which is like an incline. She posts things to get other people to join her too. And so that to me is extremely inspirational, because when we first started, she was just so huggy, and she was so excited to see that there was a supportive system. And now it's amazing to see how she's glowing completely. She's glowing at an age that, people are like, wow, you go outdoors, and she looks so great. She's lost so much weight. She's taken on these new health and fitness and health and wellness techniques that she does personally. So to me, that is all that counts, is I was able to create events that she could feel supported through. So.
And it was okay that she hadn't started when she was 13 or 15 years old. It's something that she could start at any point in her life and take off running with.
And she's from the island. So, I mean, I think nature was always a part of it, but having a supportive place to say, okay, this is something that I can do on the regular.
Awesome. Tyrhee, any stories you want to share?
Yeah, I would say that, we work with so many people on a regular basis, but through our, we work with cohorts, like leadership cohorts. And one thing that I've seen sort of as a huge sort of success out of that is a lot of folks will come in with like a general interest, or have some like very minor experience there, but are able to sort of leave the cohort and become leaders and sort of help train other people under them. And a huge aspect of the program itself, though, is that they're able to sort of come together as a group of leaders and implement other programs out to the community, which I think is sort of me saying, like, all of us have agency, like we all sort of have power over our communities, like especially with our college students and even the families, is something I always sort of I guess preach to them. It's just like, we can really sort of create change. I know that sometimes we feel really small on the college campus, right? Or we feel really small in a city like DC. But, you know, if we all can come together, similar to what I like, none of this happens on my own. I'm not alone in this. I have so many incredible volunteers and other trip leaders. But, you know, I've been able to sort of create something like this because I've sort of brought, you know, really dedicated people together that have been able to touch, you know, thousands of people at this point, right? And so like, but I'm not the only person that can do this, right? I'm not the only person that can like, you know, get other people outdoors, but also like if there's anything that you're sort of really passionate or attached to. And so I think that these cohorts is just like a version of like what I've been able to sort of do at a larger level, right? And say like, hey, like we can continue to create or like replicate this within these smaller groups of leaders. And so to sort of watch, you know, them come together, put ideas and sort of like put them into action has been sort of an ongoing sort of example of like what I love to see, right? Like I don't want to sort of have to continue to do all of the planning and like putting together of trips. Like everyone can sort of be a part of like the magic of this happening. And so that's sort of been really incredible to watch, and even seeing college students sort of graduate and continue to sort of work as volunteers, right? And like didn't climb a day in their life before they came into Soul Trak and are now sort of helping lead the climbing clubs and like teaching belay courses with like our partner like gyms and things like that. And so to just sort of see folks like really stick and attach themselves to the organization has been really powerful for me, because I think that a huge part of the reason why I created it is like I decided to move back to DC. I didn't have any sort of like outdoor community. Like when I came here, most of my friends in my community sort of seen me as like Tyrhee, the guy that does all of this outdoor stuff. And so like they weren't necessarily willing to sort of be a part of any of this with me, but they were like accepted that I was really interested in it. But now it's like I've been able to sort of have so many people like reaching out like, oh, like you want to go on a hike this weekend? Let's go climb. It's almost like overwhelming at this point. But I think that now it's kind of one of those things that I sort of reflect on as like a huge win or success, because folks now look at like sort of have it like a world to exist in and sort of really want to sort of get out in any way that they can. So definitely really rewarding for me, I guess.
And it sounds like you've really just been able to like normalize this, as this can be part of our life and part of our friendships and part of our communities, rather than something that's like out there and scary and something that other people do.
Yep. No, yeah, I think that that's the goal, right? Like that's exactly what it is.
Great. And since now we get to see the tiny little baby, I have to ask, hello. Jess, as somebody who is a mom, both to a little one and a teenage daughter, how has that changed your perspective on all of this? And how does being a mom impact and inspire you in doing this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we had discussed during our pre-meeting was the mass shootings, and that's really concerning to me, especially if someone is going intentionally and going to an Asian place and shooting up an Asian place. And the fact that my group targets Black people and they can see where, you know, events are, that worries me, that I could be out there hiking, or someone could just be doing some type of exploration or venturing. And, you know, like, how do we bring peace to one another while we're outdoors? How do we create these conversations to where we're not afraid of one another anymore? Just like the incident where we went, we had 60 or 70 women on a trail, and they called the police on us. They called the sheriff, the park rangers, and the police. And that was sheriff, park rangers, and there was one more. Yeah, sheriff, park rangers, and one other law that was called law authority. And it was devastating. I was just like, wow, I can't believe that we're out here and you call the police on us because we're a bunch of Black women hiking on a trail that has no one's name on it, you know? And so it's just concerning to now be like, I have a Black son. So how do I protect him in nature, at the grocery store, at the gas station, in school? And then my daughter, she's older now, she's 15. So it's like, how do I explain to her, you know, always watch out for yourself? How do I protect her and making sure she takes Taekwondo classes or some kind of self-defense classes to protect herself in whatever space she's in? And so it's very eye-opening to have kids and to be out in nature at the same time. It's worrisome. And just like I spoke to Rue Matt the other day with Outdoor Afro, like, what are you guys doing to really protect your members and making sure that safety is like a number one thing? Because there are people, unfortunately, who don't like Black people. There are people who don't like Indigenous people, and it's just unfortunate. So we're internally, Vibe Tribe is working to figure out new ways to protect our members and really make sure that fear is not our center. Because you don't want to be fearful of going out, because when the King Soopers shooting happened a few weeks ago, I was afraid to go anywhere. I was like, oh my God, the grocery store. So I was like, I would run into the grocery store and then like run out really quick. So it's a real thing right now, and I think a lot of the world is feeling that anxiety as far as what do we do as parents, as moms, as loved ones. It's just unfortunate. So, I mean, even Tyrhee, you could even relate to the gentleman who was walking in New York City, and that lady had that dog, and she was just like being so mean to him about, you need to not be at this park. And did he have a dog or she had a dog? I can't remember, but
he asked her to put a leash on her dog.
Yeah, and you being that you have animals, it's something for you to think about too, like, how do we handle these different situations that come about to us from Karens?
Yeah.
Karens and Kens. I think that's what they call the male version, is Kens and Karens. How do we handle those out there? And so I would love to hear from other people to help me figure out how to handle this as well. It's something that's new to me, and it's a real thing out here. So.
And that's, so the fact that you brought that up, I think is really, it's not by coincidence, right? Like, especially in reference to your son, like, just like, me and your son are essentially the same, right? Like, our existence outdoors will look the same. And something that we, like last year, obviously, when things like a lot of attention turned to sort of like this, like very criminal injustice that we're experiencing on a regular basis, right? But like, there was like this huge spotlight put on those, on the issue. And, Christian Cooper came up, right? Like, this guy was just in that park in the middle of an urban space, right? And still sort of fall victim to like things that we see, like we pin it on things like West Virginia, but it happens in New York City too, right? It happens everywhere. And it's no different than you, like, right? Like we go out on trails, we get, harassed, we get patronized, we get like everything sort of thrown at us. And we can't protect our group from those things, right? Like we can't promise that those won't happen. People aren't like necessarily safe. Like we can create psychological safety, right? But it's still something that we have to sort of like address and sort of recognize when we're outdoors. But I do think that something that, we do try and tell folks is that, we're here for one another. We can support each other through this, because I know I've been on the trail by myself, and what those encounters have looked like and how they felt a lot different than rather than having, 3 or 4 other people to sort of also maybe step in awkward situations where I can't really necessarily, I may not know how to react, or I may not know how to respond to certain behaviors. And sometimes that's needed, right? Like sometimes it's just helpful to just not have to, engage, or like not have to address certain things, and just having the comfort of like community to sort of help support you, or like sort of help shield some of that. Because sometimes, like you said, it could be just something that's like not that big of a deal, or something that might be an annoyance, but sometimes it can be something that is scary or frightening and like might actually be dangerous. Especially like going into places where there are a lot of like signals, like a lot of flags, or a lot of things that are indicating that, we are very anti your presence, or we don't want you here. And you may have to pull over to get gas because you've driven 4 hours to get here. And, there might be a really hard and like difficult encounter, and you're so far away from home, and you're so far away from any sort of resources or connections that might be a sense of safety for you. And like doing the work to sort of get people into these spaces, but also like I would feel terrible, getting people outdoors, getting people to really sort of explore in these environments, but then they sort of have experiences where we weren't able to sort of prepare or address certain things that might be a reality of them getting outdoors independently. And so I think it is really important that these things are brought up because it's the reality of the experience in itself. So the outdoors is beautiful. You have a great time. It has so many benefits. But as someone of color, like there are also some aspects of getting outdoors that might be dangerous or like might be uncomfortable that I think, that has to sort of be part of the conversation, and it might look a lot different than if you are sort of a white person that want to get outside, right? Like it might not necessarily be part of the discussion or that entry, right? Like your entry might look a lot different. And so, yeah. And I think having kids like sort of really sort of shifts like what that means to you, because it becomes much more personal, right? Like, because sometimes you can't control, like, I don't have kids, but I have a community, like I said, that I'm constantly trying to get outdoors. But when it's someone else that's sort of really, really attached to you that sometimes you can't control what that experience looks like, it becomes much more of an obligation or a duty to try and do the work so that, hopefully in 15 years when he is able to sort of maybe go out by himself, he might have it a lot easier than some of us. So
one of the things that I would suggest is if you have an outdoor organization like Judy Harris, she has Black Girls Ski and Board. She just posted it. So if you guys want to visit her Facebook group. Yeah, if you have an outdoor organization or you are going outdoors, you should stop at the visitor center and let them know, hey, I'm just taking a hike. Or if you're bringing a group outdoors, just make sure you call them and say, hey, I just want to create this relationship with you with that state park or that forest or that city park or whatever area you're going to. Just make sure that you have that relationship with those park authorities. And I feel that will help. One of the things that I'm thinking about is creating those relationships, because that will help with anything that's happening, around in that area, and just gives them a heads up.
Thank you for that. And you brought up two different kind of sources of fear. One is just the Karens and the Kens and having to worry about who else is around you on the trails. But then also, is there going to be a law enforcement response, and what is that law enforcement response going to be? And that's really where we see the overlap with the work that we do at PJI of asking questions of like, what do we need to do to decrease contact with law enforcement in the first place and decrease the likelihood that there's going to be that higher threat for people of color. And you're right that the things that, when I take a group of Boy Scouts out on those same trails, and I'll just call it out, the Jeffco open spaces where this happened, that we don't have to worry about whether the boys are being too loud, and we don't have to have those kinds of concerns. So what do we need to do structurally as a criminal legal system to change, if somebody gets those calls, what is the response going to be, and how can we make sure that there's structures in place that can make you feel safer when you're on trails, rather than having to worry about, is that going to be a law enforcement response, and is that law enforcement response going to escalate, and is this going to be in a community where I don't have relationships and supports if something happens? And so I'm wondering if either of you have thoughts about, for those of us who are trying to be anti-Karens, what you'd like to see as changes in the system and changes in what those responses would be.
Tyrhee, do you want to go?
Yeah, I guess so. I can start. One thing, I guess, in terms of we're talking about authority. So these are public lands, and so one of the big things I think that we have struggled with is like folks claiming ownership over space and sort of feeling like since they may have existed there or sort of spend more time there, that they sort of created this ideal sort of environment that sort of has created its own norms, and have felt like very empowered to sort of tell groups like, hey, like, can you all stay within like this area of the crag, or like, can you all, not cheer each other on, or just like things that I've spent a lot of time at those same crags alone, sometimes with folks that are white, and I've never heard these rules. So like, there's just like new things that sort of come up when sort of see like an increased presence of Black people in spaces. And for me, it's one of those things where if you feel that way, I can't change how you feel, but there are people who are higher, sort of like in a position to sort of help sort of administer sort of direction and rules to sort of the inhabitants of the space. And so I would recommend going to those folks first and saying like, hey, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but maybe you know, you can give me clarification. But and if that is something that like there are rules that are being broken, then maybe going through that system. But also honestly understanding that like a lot of the rules and sort of restrictions over park space have been created around like a pre-existing culture and like folks that sort of have already sort of spent a lot of time in those spaces. And so sometimes just being okay with people existing or recreating a little differently because you just may not be familiar with that, like, or you just, you haven't seen it, and it's okay for it to be different. Now, if it's something that's damaging to the space, fair enough. Like, I understand that, like, you know, that is something to sort of be like cautious of. But if folks are being loud or like cheering each other on, or like maybe just simply like walking off the edge of a trail, like sometimes that is okay to sort of pass by and not sort of run into a moment of conflict, because like how you all were alluding to, that could be someone's life on the line, right? Like a small, just like, oh, like you all need to do this, or like it'd be better if you like could just stay off of here. I'm gonna go tell the park ranger that you all are doing something wrong. Could real like, and this is without exaggeration, someone could be shot, right? Like someone could be hurt as a result of that. And so just maybe thinking first around like, you know, is this worth someone's life right now? Or like, could I just like sort of ignore this for the sake of like everyone's safety, but also just because it may not be that big of a deal. And I'm just like overstepping my own like sort of level of authority over the situation. And so for me, I think that is one of the biggest things, is just being able to sort of measure like the severity of like certain aspects of the situation, but then also the understanding that there's just like a different level of sort of existence in that space. And I think that sometimes people are uncomfortable with things looking or sort of being different. And so, yeah, I would say that, but then also just readdressing some of the things that we're doing in DC as an organization is starting to sort of work with the park system and just starting to sort of look at some of the policies and things that are in place that may sort of be prohibitive or just like create like more restraint on certain cultural groups, right? Like if there's a limitation on sort of camp space, right? Like, and if a normal Latinx household may be, you know, 6 people, like on average, right? Like if you're only allowing 4 people to sort of camp there or sort of sleep in that space, then you're immediately sort of excluding a huge demographic of people potentially from being able to, you know, camp at this site, right? And so, or even like the volume, right? Like if we feel most comfortable traveling in groups because of for the sake of our safety, we're naturally going to be louder. And so if you're telling us that we can't be loud, then you're essentially telling us that we can't be there. And so just understanding that some rules naturally come with a level of exclusion. And some of that, I believe, is truly intentional. It has been intentional. And so it takes, like, we also in a time where we have to sort of go back and readdress some of those policies that are in place because innately they're racist. And so we have to sort of look and see where we can sort of create more normalized rules that sort of, you know, are more welcoming to a much larger group of people.
Thank you so much. We are just about out of time, but thanks both of you. We've heard so much, both in terms of what systems can be doing on the structural side to make sure that spaces are welcoming and supportive and not discriminatory in practices, and also all of the opportunities that you both offer in your organizations to create a sense of community and support to really be able to close that nature gap and to be cultivating new generations of leaders so that this really is a movement that's spreading across the country, and lots of people are able to step into similar spaces to the work that you've both done. So it's been fantastic being able to hear from both of you. And I know that Wendy has put in the chat box the links to your websites and your social media so that people who've joined us tonight can continue to connect with you and follow the great work that you do. And I know that you both have event calendars as well for anybody that's interested in getting involved with a hike or an event to check out those websites. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you, Tyrhee, as well. And I'm going to invite my colleague, Tennille Patterson, who's going to be hosting our next event in this series to join us to be able to give us a sneak peek of what we're going to be talking about next time. And Jess and Tyrhee, thanks again.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks for
having me. Take care.
Yep.
Thanks to everyone. This was an amazing conversation. And Tyrhee, you actually did a a great job of helping me segue into closing this out and extending an invite for you to come along to the next conversation, bring a friend and tell a friend to bring another friend. As you know, we are the Pretrial Justice Institute. And so these conversations are really important to us because not only do they add to our perspectives, but they also challenge our thinking about what environments become pretrial spaces. So Tyrhee very eloquently described how nature can become a pretrial space because simply from someone not being willing to expand their understanding of who is actually who can have access to that space. And early in the conversation, Jessica mentioned how important it was to play. Well, that actually is going to be a component of what we're going to talk about next time. We're going to explore the intersection of race, justice, and rest expanding also into play. It's a very political topic, particularly in the context of COVID, around who we believe should have access to rest and who is eligible to rest. It definitely came up around the conversations about essential workers. And so we invite everyone to come and participate in that conversation. It will be soon, and we will be sending out information, inviting you all more formally. So thanks again to everyone that joined, and welcome to the next one.
Thanks, Tennille. Thanks again, everyone, for participating, and follow us at Pretrial on Twitter, and we'll be able to keep you up to date on all of the upcoming events. And we'll post this recording on YouTube so you can share it with any of your friends that missed it tonight. Thanks so much and have a great evening and happy Earth Day.